tape and watches 3 stories recorded by Art the Clown. So does that make the Art shot footage the found variety? Well, kinda, and for the benefit of this list, let's just say that yes, it totally does. The first of these 3 tales Sarah watches is The Ninth Circle, which sees Art drug and kidnap a young woman called Casey. Awakening chained up in a room with 2 other ladies, Kristen and Sarah, Casey and Kristen decide to explore where their chains lead to once Sarah has been dragged away. Awaiting this duo, there's a bizarre humanoid creature who swiftly dismembers Kristen and accidentally frees Casey. This freedom is only fleeting though, because she ends up surrounded by hooded figures and has to watch these creeps pull a fetus from the womb of an unknown woman. Following that ordeal, the bizarre and brutal goes to an even more horrific level as Casey is similarly assaulted by Satan as the Ninth Circle ends, implying that she'll suffer the same fate as this woman. Number 4, forever looking over your shoulder, The Bear. Changing pace from that pure grimness for a second, The Bear is a found footage movie that's framed as confidential US government reports being leaked out to the world. As is revealed at the end of the movie, the small seaside town of Claridge was involved in a cover-up over a swarm of isopods in the local water supply, with plentiful dead bodies amassed, usually after a person has either gone insane first and or had their body eaten from the inside out, and blamed on swimming accidents, shark attacks, poisonous chicken feces, and even extreme bouts of food poisoning. The truth of the matter is the aforementioned isopods had been exposed to radioactive chemicals. The government finally does intervene and wipes out these isopods with chlorine, but then publicly states that all of this was just caused by strangely high water temperatures, as all survivors are paid off to keep silent. So when reporter Donna explains at the end of the movie how she is the one leaking all of this information out to the world, her fate is that she has to live forever looking over her shoulder after putting herself in the government's crosshairs. Number 3, roped into your wife's evil scheme, capture, kill, release. It's sometimes hard to be truly unique in the murky world of found footage films, but 2016's Capture Kill Release certainly does just that. The action here revolves around Jennifer and Farhang, with Jennifer revealing to her partner how she wants to make her own snuff movie. Having long dreamt of murdering someone, she now wants to do just that and record the whole procedure. For Farhang, he initially plays along with his love before he then starts to get cold feet on the whole killing matter. You know, because murder is wrong. Still, he's pressured and badgered into assisting Jennifer in finding her torture weapons of choice, deciding on a target, and then carrying out some truly heinous acts. In too deep at this point, he is a reluctant accomplice in the sinister intentions of his wife, and his partner forces him to do completely unspeakable things. The things we do for love though, eh? Number 2, being the motivation for a complete psychopath who's coming for you next. Be My Cat, a film for Anne. Likely to have flown under the radar of many, 2015's Be My Cat, a film for Anne is a distressing found footage feature about an Anne Hathaway obsessive. Playing somewhat like Patrick Brice and Mark Duplass's Creep, a film for Anne centers on a wannabe filmmaker called Adrian as he desperately tries to get Hathaway herself to visit Romania and star in his movie. In trying to lure Hathaway to sign up for his latest project, Adrian puts together test footage with a few aspiring local actresses. With his film, titled Be My Cat, focusing on a deranged Anne Hathaway fan, the lines become blurred between reality and fiction as Adrian flits between director and becoming his character of the deranged Hathaway fan. Pushing himself over the edge, Adrian ends up offing a few people before a film for Anne ends, with potential victim Alexandra convincing him to scrap his movie and just head for Hollywood to be with the real Anne Hathaway. And, in a surprise, Adrian decides to do just that, sparing Alexandra in the process. But for the in-universe Hathaway of this film, knowing that she'd fueled such depraved murders and that he's on his way to her next certainly wouldn't make for the easiest existence. Number 1, encountering Edward Carver, the Poughkeepsie Tapes. Along with Art the Clown of Terrifier fame, Edward Carver is likely the most messed up character introduced to horror audiences across the past decade or so. For those wondering, that's the name of the twisted figure at the center of the Poughkeepsie Tapes. While most experiences with Carver do end in bloody murder, usually after torture, sexual assault, and all kinds of grim, surreal, horrific mind games, even those who survive yearn for death. To hammer this point home in brutal fashion, longtime Carver captee Cheryl Dempsey is rescued from her tormentor's clutches at the close of the Poughkeepsie Tapes. Unfortunately though, Carver is such a psychopath that he's completely conditioned Cheryl to his horrible way of life, so much so that she can't function in any other environment. This is Carver's sick final act, even when a happy ending looks like it might be in sight. Consequently, by the time the movie wraps up, Cheryl twistedly misses him so much that she tragically takes her own life after not being able to fill the hole of being away from this sicko. So yeah, the moral is, if you're a victim of Edward Carver, he still wins even if you're saved, because he gets in your head that much.
Now when we arrive at the cinema, beady-eyed and bushy-tailed, dead keen to find out which horror movie character is going to go splat and which will drag their mangled body over the finish line, we don't often expect to see characters caught in the middle ground. And yet, there's a certain subsection of directors and screenwriters whose mission it seems to be to leave their characters short of actually dying, but wishing they bloody well had done. So that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 recent horror movie fates that were worse than death. Number 10, Come Down Bear, Cocaine Bear. Cocaine Bear promised to be the loosest, wildest creature featured this side of Snakes on a Plane, yet somehow it kinda got left in the dust. Nevertheless, this year's entry into the intoxicated Ursidae canon delivered just enough thrills and spills to keep us watching. Based on a true story, and as much that there was once a bear who ate a few grams and then died, the film takes artistic license with the story of a drug smuggler who died mid-job and left packages of the other white stuff strewn around a national forest, just in time for a big old black bear to chow down on. Limbs are torn, cartel kingpins are killed, and the bear at the heart of the whole caper gets a taste of a blow that could put Charlie Sheen to shame, consuming entire bricks of the stuff in single helpings. But what goes up must come down. A bear who has spent several days on the trot binging millions of dollars of coke is in for a shocker when the nose candy runs dry. We've all had rough mornings where death seems like a small mercy compared to our splitting headaches, dry throats and the like, but not like this. Not only will this be the come down from hell, the bear will be all on its lonesome facing addiction, withdrawal, and whatever permanent gut issues eating such quantities of this stuff will give you. Maybe the real bear got off lightly, you know what I'm saying? Number 9, Survivor's Guilt, Knock at the Cabin. M. Night Shyamalan caught the world by surprise this year by not actually Shyamalan-maning at all. The director is known for paradigm-shifting twists that have, for the past decade and a half, been the low-hanging fruit by which his films have been disparaged or dismissed. But not so with his most recent release, Knock at the Cabin. Here, a group of horsemen arrive at a remote cabin armed with homemade weapons and a holy mission. They take holidaymakers Eric, Andrew, and their adopted daughter Wen hostage, telling the dads if one of them doesn't kill the other, the world is going to come to an end. Because, you know, okay then. As they near the point of no return, tsunamis engulf coastlines, planes fall from the sky, and a pandemic spreads across continents. And while most of us spend the duration waiting for the other shoe to drop, it never does. Andrew kills Eric and makes it out alive with Wen, actually legitimately preventing the end of the world. Now Andrew only has the rest of his life to think about what he did. It's hard to say what's worse, killing your partner or remaining indecisive enough to ensure the deaths of millions across the globe. But now he has all the time he needs to mull it over, all the time in the world. Number 8, Survivor's Lack of Guilt, Possessor. Brandon Cronenberg's second feature film Possessor may have been shot down by the pandemic, but it's certain to live on in the annals of psychological horror as a standout accomplishment in darkness and misery on a rather slender budget. Here we focus on Tasia Voss, an assassin existing in an alternate past, 2008 to be specific, who uses technology to take control of other bodies and complete her contracts, often forcing lovers, family members, and trusted confidants to murder one another. While the process may be nice and clean on paper and allows Voss and her organization to slip away without anyone knowing that they were there, little thought is given, at least on her part, to how the constant inhabitance of others' minds affects the user. She gradually slips away from normality, becoming distanced from her family life and constantly reliving the violence that she conducts in secret. By the time the chickens come home to roost, it is unfortunately too late to do anything about it. Stuck inside the body of one of her targets, Tasia willingly participates in the murder of her own husband and son, and becomes the perfect killer, free from all human attachments and really any reason for living in the first place. Number 7, Life-Altering Injuries, Scream 6. A trip to the big city was precisely what the Scream franchise needed, after the 5 previous films were spent essentially rerunning different variations of the same plot in and around the small death-stricken town of Woodsboro. Thus, number 6 transplants the action to New York City, kicking off the break from tradition with a shocking opening sequence Ghostface reveal, and things only get wilder from there, as the ghosts from Ghostface's past stalk our little group of survivors. caregivers. Unfortunately, in breaking from tradition, Scream 6 doesn't necessarily know when to stop, and previously disposable characters can now suffer mortal wounds and just get back up for another movie. But that doesn't mean that the ramifications of such injuries can be treated so callously. I mean, just ask creaky, broken old Dewey from the franchise's last entry. And nobody should fear this more than Chad. Immediately after sealing the deal with his on-screen honey Tara, Chad falls victim to the killer's knives a dozen or so times and somehow survives. He may be laughing it off as he's wheeled into an ambulance at the end of the film, but there's a dozen fresh internal injuries on top of the 7 or so stabs that he received in the previous film. The amount of physical therapy, invasive surgery, and life-changing alterations coming his way, well, they're going to be no laughing matter at all. Number 6. Maiming Mum, Run. Run sees wheelchair-bound Chloe under the rule of Apache helicopter parent Diane, who controls every single last aspect of her disabled daughter's life, from medication to schooling and beyond. Suffering from arrhythmia, asthma, diabetes, hemochromatosis, and partial paralysis, Chloe has had a bit of a rough ride to say the least, but the discoveries that she makes when digging up dirt on her medication makes the whole situation a hell of a lot worse. And Annie Wilkes for the Z generation, Diane has been poisoning Chloe with, amongst other things, dog medication in order to keep her ill and under control, but most shockingly of all, confined to the wheelchair. Even once Diana has been caught and Chloe is off the meds, the effects are lasting, and Chloe has to use wheelchairs and canes for the rest of her life. The real sting of the film, however, comes at the very end. 7 years on, Diane is serving a lengthy sentence for her crime and appears to be bedbound, emaciated, and suffering from an unspecified illness. It turns out that Chloe has been paying her mother regular visits, smuggling pills into prison to keep Diane sedate, unwell, and, as seems to be the case, psychologically compromised. Ooh, what goes around, eh? Number 5. Slipping the Curse, Smile. Going where surprisingly few horror movies have gone before, Parker Finn's smile succeeded last year in making happiness creepy. While it made some of its bones on jump scares and familiar plot twists, the film nevertheless managed to put an indelible new image into our own memories: the bloody, fleshy villain known simply and fittingly as the Monstrosity. The largely invisible antagonist of the film, the Monstrosity's curse passes between individuals who have witnessed trauma, infecting their minds with hallucinations of manic, grinning friends, relatives, and co-workers, and driving them to near insanity before making them kill themselves. The next person in line is the one who witnesses the death, and so on. Apart, that is, from Robert Talley. Incarcerated for life, Talley manages to find a way out of the vicious cycle by brutally murdering somebody else in front of a witness in order to pass it on to them. But did he think this through? Prison itself is no easy ride, but he has to live with the guilt and regret for what he did. On top of that, he'll never feel safe again. Gripped by the terror of having experienced the curse, fearful at every turn that it could come back to him again, does not seem like a good way to live at all. Number 4. Trapped in the windmills of Maddie's mind, Malignant. Malignant represents something of a return to form for James Wan, who had been out of the director's chair on a horror picture since 2016's Conjuring 2, which itself was slotted uncomfortably between Aquaman, which saw Jason Momoa and company ride sharks, and Furious 7, which saw Vin Diesel and company try to jump them. Cut loose from any of the horror series that made and perpetuated Wan's name, Malignant is a true original, centering around Maddie Mitchell and the seemingly supernatural connection that she shares with a murderous telepath, known as Gabriel, who has recently come out of hiding. As Maddie delves into her forgotten past, which began at a mysterious research hospital, she remembers the influence Gabriel used to have over her, encouraging her to do terrible things. And the reason for this? Well, Gabriel is neither a ghost nor a manifestation of mental illness. He is a parasite literally growing out of the back of her head. A fight for Maddie's body ensues, and after some seriously close shaves, our heroine triumphs. Good for Maddie, not so good for Gabriel. As she can't excise him entirely, she traps him in a pitch-black mindscape with a set of prison bars in order to keep him in, so he's destined to spend the rest of his life in the psychological equivalent of the abyss. Number 3. Becoming Candyman, Candyman 2021. When the decision was made to resurrect Candyman, few of us held our breath, suspecting another paint-by-numbers contemporary remake in the vein of 2009's Friday the 13th and 2010's A Nightmare on Elm Street that would probably add little to the legend and only exist to line studio executive pockets. And yet, in 2021's Candyman, the director managed to build upon the series' canon without sullying it, and in many places fixed the original film's problems by confronting issues of race and class. This time around, artist Anthony McCoy is the one caught in Candyman's honey, struggling to break through with his work on one side, and on the other, consumed by an obsession with the original victim Helen Lyle's research and the grim fates of a string of black men generations before him. Unfortunately for Anthony, he undergoes a physical transformation that begins in a bee sting and spreads from his hand across his entire body. He's subsequently kidnapped, has his hand cut off, and is gunned down by the police. All in all, not a great day's Candyman in. Never mind the fact that as an artist, Anthony's hands are a fundamental part of his craft, he now has to exist for eternity in a limbo nether state as part of the Candyman hive, to be summoned back to reality by those curious enough to say his name in the mirror. Number 2. A Life Underground. Barbarian. What Barbarian loses in a confusion of plot lines and muddle of themes, it makes up for in creative scares and a deep and abiding terror that literally takes us beneath the idyllic sheen of suburbia. Suspicions are high from the outset as two Airbnbers double book the same property and wind up having to spend the night together in an otherwise abandoned neighborhood. And it doesn't help that one of them is Pennywise himself, Bill Skarsgård. However, the first night passes without incident, and it isn't until the second that things begin to unravel. The pair get stuck in the basement and discover several hidden areas, including a labyrinthine complex far underground. This is the lair of the Mother, a filthy, naked, subhuman brute who stalks the passages during the day and comes up into the house at night, seeking victims to become her children. But before we sharpen the pitchforks, there's a whole lot of backstory that might explain her behavior and her unavoidable predicament. It turns out the Mother has been forced to live underground, the product of an abusive rapist who kept women in the basement and bred from them and their children. She is the deformed product of generations of incest, alienated from society and unable to fully understand things, least of all, her own rather miserable situation. And number 1, Permanent Vacation in Hell. Daniel Isn't Real. A film that would make both of the Cronenbergs proud, hellish psychological body horror Daniel Isn't Real courts controversy from its pants-on-fire title onwards, opening with a child witnessing a mass shooting in a coffee shop and really going to hell and back. Protagonist Luke Nightingale was the aforementioned child, who now suffers from poor mental health and seeks the return of his invisible friend Daniel, who encourages him to do ever more dangerous and violent things. As it turns out, Daniel is a very real parasitic demon who is on a mission to make Luke's body his own, and very nearly does. Luke is hypnotized by a therapist, allowing Daniel the leeway to take over his body and trap him in the castle, an otherworldly dimension that manifests as a hellish version of the dollhouse that Luke trapped Daniel in when he was a child. But although he teeters on the precipice of damnation, it's not actually Luke who suffers the worst fate of all. You see, Luke eventually breaks free, but while stuck inside Daniel's dark place, which is somewhere between hell and the abyss. Here he encounters a wretched beast with a thorny, melted face. The hell beast is in fact John Thigpen, the coffee shop killer from the very beginning of the movie. He's been deformed by Daniel into something unspeakable and cursed to haunt this hellscape forever. So yeah, all in all, Luke gets off pretty lightly here.